I got brand new orders from your overlords at Bushiroad HQ. Hold on a moment. Yeah? What do you mean, not those kind of orders? Wait, what? Orders, the brand new mechanic that's here to change the game. But what does it actually entice for us?
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to a brand new discussion, and this time we're gonna take a look at the brand new mechanic that was revealed during the latest product live streams. And these are none other than the order cards. Basically the spell and trap cards for Vanguard. And to quickly refresh your memory if you don't know what these orders are, basically these are a new type of cards that will go into our main deck, and we have two types, normal orders and blitz orders. Normal orders can only be used during your main phase, and blitz orders can only be used during your guard step. So one is during your turn and the other is during your opponent's turn. And we already have seen the reveal of two cards, and the first one was of course the shield ticket that we could get with the new starter abilities if we went second and our opponent's already at the grade 1 or higher when we ride up to grade 1. And these tickets will go into our hand, and then we can use that during the defense step when our opponent is attacking us, and then we can give a unit plus 5k power with that extra shield. But that extra card in hand, just like any other normal order card, can be used for other kinds of abilities, even G-assisting, to effectively don't throw away important unit cards. And the other card that was revealed was of course the new power potion that we could give a unit plus 20k power for a counter blast 2 for the end of turn. And I already discussed the consequence of that power potion in this video with the Cardfight update from this week. So if you want to have a better understanding of what you can utilize it for and in what scenarios it might be useful, then check out that video, because in this video we're gonna mainly focus around the general sense of what these order cards will bring to the table for Vanguard as a whole. So now that you have an idea of what these order cards are, let's basically talk the talk and see what these cards will mean for the game in general. So first off, we now have spell and pseudo trap cards in our deck. So that means deck building would change completely. As before order cards were a thing, we only had to focus around normal unit types. That was the only actual card type that went into the deck. Yes, we had trigger units and normal units, but they were basically the same. And trigger units, we were forced to run 16 types of those in our deck, which limit on 4 heal triggers maximum. So that didn't really affect us in deck building, and we were mainly focused around having a good grade distribution so we could consistently ride up from grade 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, and in some cases even to grade 4. So we never really had to think about non-unit cards in our deck that we maybe could utilize in some kind of capacity, but that could impact our deck consistency, and most notably that is unique to Vanguard than any other type of TCG out there, our ride consistency. So that makes these new type of main deck cards a bit tricky, as not only do we have our generic consistency of the deck engine that we're playing, like any other deck in other TCG, like Hearthstone, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, but now we also need to consistently find ways to get to the next grade before our next turn so we can ride up and utilize stronger cards. Because the interesting part about these order cards is that they also possess a grade, meaning we can only use order cards effectively during our turn if we have the correct grade on our Vanguard to use them. So when these cards will introduce in the TCG and OCG, that means deck building would change forever, as now we also need to think about if we want to incorporate a certain order card in our deck or not. And then comes the question, do we want a offensive order during our turn, or do we want a more defensive order during our opponent's turn, so we can basically combat some weaknesses of the deck. And that is where the interesting part comes with the deck building this aspect, because what I'm suspecting what will happen is that most decks would probably only run 1 to 4 order cards. This could be lower at the beginning and increase later when we get stronger and stronger order cards or more useful order cards. As the first batch, don't expect them to be very powerful. It's the first cards that we're going to get, and it's always much weaker, so we can accustom to the mechanic. So we're going to have that type of deck that utilize a little bit of the order cards, But we could also see decks that will incorporate a ton of these order cards if they are from enough value that the deck can utilize them. And these will probably be in those superior right chain decks. A good example is Tsukiyomi. And the reason why I'm stating that is because if you're running a lot of order cards, you're decreasing the right consistency of your deck. So a normal type of deck cannot really take the gamble, as it will sacrifice a lot of right consistency. But something like Tsukiyomi with the inherent right chain, they can combat that right consistency dip with their right skills, as they check multiple cards before riding up and then they go into their higher grade. So they can get away with running less normal units and more of these order cards. We already seen it with some old successful Tsukiyomi builds where they run a crap ton of grade 3s, like some builds 12, maybe even more, because they don't care for the right consistency, as they already have the inherent right consistency of their right chain. So if we get more of those type of decks, then we probably can see builds that will incorporate much more order cards. But we also have decks that will probably run 0 order cards. And that can be because of 2 reasons. One, they cannot capitalize or utilize these order cards abilities that we have access to at the moment, so there's no point for them to run them. But also, some decks, like the old Gear Chronicle before the new Chronofang support, Lost Legend build, that was already running some awkward amounts of units because they also need to incorporate the grade 4s in their deck that they can utilize. So their grade 1, 2, and 3 ratios were already very screwed in an awkward way. So then to try put in more cards is even more crazy talk, then because you're now decreasing your right consistency even more. And this will be the same case for the Valkyrian build for Genesis, but depending on what the new support for Genesis will bring us, that could be a non-issue, just like what happened with Chrono Tiger Rebellion, as that build has less issue with some screwed ratios, as they can get away with just running for Rebellion. And that's the basic impact for deck building, what will happen right from day one, as we won't get a lot of orders at day one, and probably also not really strong ones, so don't expect them to be all that impactful or all that important at the beginning. But once we get a couple sets in with multiple orders, then things could change. Because one interesting thing that they can do is they can make new archetypes, new decks, that focuses around orders. Because we've already seen this ticket generation with the starters. And to give a better explanation of what the tickets are with the Blitz orders and normal orders, you can basically see that tickets are to orders what token cards are to normal units. They are somewhat the same, but at the same time, not really. They're pseudo versions of the actual thing. Because the ticket, the shield ticket, is basically a different version of a Blitz order. And what can happen is that we can get an archetype that generates these different types of tickets that can be either Blitz orders or normal orders, and that could be an interesting thing. Or we could get an archetype that focuses around fetching orders from decks, so you can run specific cards and you can actually search them out, like a Royal Paladin can search out rear guards from their deck. This is a likely scenario, but probably not right from the get-go. I expect them to do that a couple of months in, maybe even after this whole season is done and we get the product live stream for the summer, and then afterwards, that's the moment that they probably incorporate this. Because that's what happened with gift markers. At the beginning, like 6-7 months, markers were just your normal thing. Until Miyagi Academy set dropped, VBT03, when we got the Witches archetype. As that was, I believe, the first time where we interact with gift markers like just generic writing, because the Witches could turn their Witches cards into extra protect markers. And then afterwards, in the next set, the Answer of Truth set, that's where we kicked things off with the whole Great Nature thing with the Hemske Raijin, where they could generate more Axel markers, as that was basically the opening of Pandora's box, and that's where we all got these crazy things like Mordred Phantom and stuff, where we can just excel all these markers onto the field like crazy and have these insane decks that utilize markers to a whole different level than what was the case when the reboots started and when the whole imaginary gift marker mechanic was introduced. That is probably also going to happen with these Blitz orders and normal order cards, but it will probably take a while before we go into that train of motion. But it's an interesting thing to look forward to, as that means we can open the door for all kinds of crazy new deck mechanics and deck strategies, and that's actually pretty damn exciting. And there was one final thing that I want to talk about, and that is the orders themselves with their effects and the potential in the game. Because currently we have two different effects for orders. We have the shield ticket, which is pretty awesome, but we also have this power potion. And the shield ticket was unique in its own way because this was a new going second mechanic that was interesting. It was a card in hand that you could use for G-assist, also for different kinds of discard skills, like with Gear Chronicle with binding, like Lost Legends, you can bind that card and then draw another card, so you can some would say you can get a plus on hand because you now get a new unit card in hand that you can use for offensive plays. So that was different. But then we got the power potion card, and this is what I was expecting what these order cards are going to do. The first wave is going to be very generic abilities, but this is very interesting because in Vanguard we have the idea that every effect is attached to a body. But that's not the case for a typical TCG, as a lot of other games have spell cards and trap cards where they have a powerful effect but with no body. But once they get a card in their TCG respectively that has a body with the same effect, that is seen as insane because you get a body on that effect. In our case, we go reverse, so it's actually, it sounds like a reverse power creep because now we get the effect which we typically expect to be on a body, but we don't get the body, which sounds really bad in our case. But there is an argument to make that this could change everything for the entire game because they can incorporate standard effects which we have access to in your typical deck or a typical clan, but other clans don't, and now those clans can have access to those abilities. A simple example is a retire effect. We could get a normal order card that states counted as one retire unit. We can now sacrifice a card in hand, we don't get a body on it, for destroying one card on our opponent's field. That might not sound great if you're playing something like Narukami, Kagero, Shadow Paladin, or something like that, because you already have inherent retires on your units, on your bodies. But for other clans that never got access to a retire effect, and you want to have sometimes you active access to those kind of abilities, this could be game changing for them. As now they can say, I am willing to sacrifice a normal unit in my deck to have access to a basic ability which an other clan already inherently has. So I can retire, but to sacrifice that I have less units in deck that I can utilize to just push for game. And this can basically be the birth of a whole range of new builds and strategies for different archetypes within a clan. And I think this is the better way of giving every clan everything, but still allow them to retain their clan identity. And what I mean by that is for the players that only started after the reboot, this might sound weird as giving every clan the same thing that just robs out of clan identity. But for everybody that have been playing during the G era, this is basically to fix the issue what G era did at the end, where every clan could multi-attack, come in with a triple drive, basically a quad drive with crits, have a resetting Vanguard, come with a lot of powers, guard restrict. Basically, every clan did everything, but they only did it in a different way because they have a different type of mechanic that utilize that. Like Royal Paladin, Superior Calls from the deck, that's allow them to multi-attack, but Dark Relics does it from the soul, Gear Chronicle does it via Time Leap. Essentially does the same thing, but just in a different way to say, oh look, that's their clan identity. Now with these order cards, you can somewhat do the same thing, but they need to make a sacrifice that they don't have actual units attached to them. So you are forcing your players to make a decision, do I want that extra ability, but am I willing to sacrifice units on the board for that minor effect? And we can go in all type of crazy directions. We can have order cards that can retire stuff from the field. We can even have order cards that can allow us to draw cards. We can even have cards that state, use it, give your Vanguard an extra drive. But you're minusing from hand and you don't get a unit onto the board. So it could be counter as one, use it, and your Vanguard get an extra drive, something like that. That could also be a thing. So there are a lot of options for these new order cards that we can utilize, and I'm very curious of what Bushiroad is going to take. So that basically concludes every basic information about these order cards and what type of impact they can have for the game. Now I want to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments down below what type of impact you think these order cards are going to have on deck building, on the way how Bushiroad is going to design future cards, but also what do you think can be a potential future order card as well as Blitz order cards? So normal and Blitz orders, there are a lot of possibilities, but my advice is don't go overboard. Don't immediately think about something, counterblast to restand your Vanguard after this, because that cannot be a thing, because normal order cards can only be during your main phase, and Blitz orders only during the time that you're guarding. So also don't make directly a Denial Griffin for everybody. That's just insane. What could be is maybe a Shiryuki-esque card for everyone as a Blitz order. That could be something. But then probably a little bit weaker, maybe only 5k for 2 units instead of 3 for 10. That could be a thing. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'm very curious of what you have to say. And of course, as always, I will highlight the most interesting and maybe the peculiar ones in next week's episode. Last week we talked about the Bushiroad livestream from the World Championships for the English format. And this is what you guys had to say. Kirby's live. Yes, I also don't know why Raid Shadow Legends isn't the sponsor of the show. I mean, guys, you're missing out on so much money. I mean, Raid Shadow Legends, hook me up, man. I can be your next big business partner. Emmanuel Galvan, I mean, this is exactly the reason why we need best out of 3 at competitive tournaments. You must eliminate these RNG elements from a competitive setting, because either one player opens God and they win the game, or the exact opposite and the player opens a complete brick and just immediately die a miserable death. That's fine because it's a TCG game, but you need to eliminate those factors to be a deciding factor of which player we either move on in the tournament bracket, or which player we're going to crown the #1 player of the tournament or the #1 player of the world. So yeah, I'm 100% agreeing with you. Machine Emperor, I mean, I'm personally all ups for a 2-deck format, as it brings out more skill level from players, because they now need to master 2 different decks, not just one. And also they need to be mastering against more than your typical decks, as there is a highly likely chance we see more unique builds. Of course, in most cases, people will just pick the best 2 decks, but it's not always that clear. There is a highly likely chance that we're in a meta, which we were in the previous season, where there are a couple of decks that are pretty good. And also the moment that you incorporate a 2-deck format, the tier list will fluctuate a little bit, because now decks need to be better against a whole plethora of range of decks and not to your typical decks, because you will see more decks in a tournament, so this means other decks will shine a little bit better than what would otherwise. And if you're interested about this 2-deck format, then check out this video of Different Fight, where he commentated one of these tournaments that was held. It is a older video, but it gives you a good understanding what this 2-deck format would look like. And it's basically what we've seen in Hearthstone, and that's what I really like about Hearthstone's World Championships, or basically their tournament setting, is they have a best out of 3 in case, because you come in with 3 or sometimes 4 decks. And they can get away with that, as it's a digital card game, so building decks and getting those cards is a lot easier and a lot cheaper than a physical card game. So if we want to incorporate that in Vanguard or in any other kind of TCG, and to not make the expense go through the roof for players, I think a 2-deck format is the way to go. And that's basically everything for today. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely Patreons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support us and join the ranks of our Patreons, then head over to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one!